I saw Will Stein's name pop up as a potential candidate for the Arizona coaching vacancy. I really don't think that's going to happen. Here we go.
You are Locked On Ducks, your daily podcast on the Oregon Ducks, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Yes, it is that time once again for Locked On Ducks. I'm your host, Spencer McLaughlin. Thank you so much for making this your first listen or your first view every day. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day, and your number one source to stay up to date with the Ducks. So if you have not already, please like, comment, subscribe, rate, review wherever you listen to or watch this show, which today is brought to you by LinkedIn. These days, every new potential hire can feel like a high-stakes wager for your small business. That's why LinkedIn Jobs helps find the right people for your team faster and for free. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/lockedoncollege. Terms and conditions do apply. So, Will Stein is the offensive coordinator for the Ducks. He had a very good season this year, coordinating a top 5 offense in all of college football. Bo Nix is a Heisman finalist. He's going to have a lot of weapons, that one of which I'll talk about on the underrated side of things a little bit later in the show. I don't see him as being a target for Arizona. This has not been widely reported. There have just been a couple lists put together by some national or local reporters about, hey, who could potential targets be for the Arizona head coaching vacancy? And I saw Will Stein's name pop up on a list from, I think it was CBS Sports. I saw it one other place as well. Stein is not a very old guy. And the reason I don't think that he's going to be the top target or even a legitimate target for Arizona as they seek to replace Jedd Fisch, who's replacing Caleb DeBoer, who's replacing Nick Saban. The coaching carousel is really, really fun, is because Stein doesn't quite have the pedigree to be hired as a head coach just yet. That doesn't mean he isn't a good offense coordinator. I really like him. But there is a distinct difference between him and Kenny Dillingham, and that's that Dillingham had been an offensive coordinator at 2 Power 5 destinations prior to his arrival at Oregon. The other factor in play, and why this is not a comparable situation, is that Kenny Dillingham is an alum of Arizona State. Will Stein is not an alum of Arizona. He's an alum of Louisville. So, if anything, that's a place where we should be watching. And guess what? Jeff Brom just had Louisville inside the top 15 or top 20 after they lost to USC in the Holiday Bowl. They played in the ACC championship game. I don't think there's anything to worry about there. That doesn't mean Will Stein can't one day be a head coaching candidate, because he's shown he's got some recruiting chops and certainly schemes an offense that is really effective and does well with quarterbacks. And that tends to play well with coaches and athletic directors and presidents and fan bases when you're trying to find, okay, what do we like about this guy? What does he bring to the table? Well, he's got a great track record with quarterbacks. Well, that's the most important position in all of football. So that's going to certainly raise eyebrows eventually. But coming from UTSA, and in a year in which they were in Conference USA while he was there, Dan Lanning hired him and, gave him the biggest job that he has had to date. But he's been a quality control guy at Texas before. He was not a coordinator there. He was only the co-OC at UTSA for 1 year. He was the OC at Oregon this past year. I thought he was really good. His profile can certainly grow. But if you see his name on a list somewhere, I would not be the least bit worried about it. I am far less worried about the idea of Stein being the Arizona head coach than I am Dan Lanning being the Alabama head coach, going back, a couple weeks in time. And guess what? Lanning staying put. I think Will Stein is going to stay put. I think the players that he has brought in, and the rest of the staff as well, obviously it's a collaborative team effort, it's going to be a fantastic lineup of offensive players for him to be able to coordinate next year. So if he's a guy who does have head coach aspirations, it'd be in his best interests to stay at Oregon anyway. Because if you're the OC at Oregon for a couple years and you're part of, a couple more top 5 or 10 recruiting classes nationally and teams that make the college football playoff and top 5, 10 offenses in all of college football, you could get a job that's even bigger than Arizona if the right opening comes along. So I think that for Will Stein, he's going to stay put. I think he's going to have a lot to work with next year. Dylan Gabriel, Dante Moore is the backup. You've got a great lineup of running backs headlined by Jordan James and Noah Whittington. You got Evan Stewart coming in from the portal. There's just all sorts of reasons why I think he sticks around, and I don't think that he is a big-time target just yet. If Oregon has another year in which they're top 5 offensively in the entire country, yeah, his name will generate more buzz. But Dillingham got hired at the age at which he did, as the youngest Power 5 head coach in all of college football, by the way, partially because he's an ASU alum. And that's where he wants to be. And they needed someone who could invigorate the program, and he's done that. And he's brought the energy down there. Look, I'm glad Oregon has Will Stein. I'm also rooting for Kenny Dillingham. I really am. I thought Dillingham did a great job in 2022. Certainly was not perfect, but overall did very well. And I think that the way he coaches down at Arizona State is the way I would want anybody to coach about the school that I root for. He is passionate, he is energetic, and he wants to be there, and he wants to make that work. That's why we all love Lanning. I think Dillingham down at ASU is going to succeed. And I think Stein one day could succeed as a head coach. He's not quite as vocal as I think Kenny Dillingham is, but he is every bit as smart. The recruiting chops are pretty darn solid at this point, because you're not pulling guys out of the portal like Dylan Gabriel and Dante Moore if you don't know how to recruit a little bit. It's not just Dan Lanning or just, Will Stein even. There are other guys involved, but Stein's at the center of that. That's the highest ranking offensive coach on staff. I think he's fantastic. I do not think, if you're an Oregon fan and you see this anywhere, you need to be worried about him going to take the Arizona head coaching job. I'd be surprised if he even interviewed for it. I mean, if you're Will Stein, you'd take an interview if it came along. I don't know if it'll even get that far. I think they've got other targets in mind. I think Oregon is going to be just fine right there. Along the offensive line, I also know that Oregon's going to be fine. Among the reasons that Will Stein is going to have all the tools in his toolbox to operate with in 2024, we best not overlook the offensive line. Because of Johnny Cornelius, he's announced that he's coming back. He started every game at right tackle this season. You've got Josh Connerly back. That was the starting left tackle for the Ducks this past year. You're going to have Poncho slide over to center. You bring in Matthew Bedford from Indiana probably to start at guard. You got a bunch of other guards who have played some and looked good in the time that they've been on the field. Guys like Nishat Strother or Davey Uli. And now you've got Marcus Harper coming back. It's just an embarrassment of riches up front. So there are a couple reasons why I like Marcus Harper coming back for the Ducks. Number one, he has been a starter for this Oregon O-line, perhaps the least heralded of the bunch, both in his recruiting profile and potential NFL draft prospects. He has been such a solid piece on these last two offensive lines that have been elite. There's no other way to describe them. They've been elite offensive lines, and Marcus Harper has been at the center of both of those units. Not literally, he'll be probably the backup center going into next year, but he is somebody who has just done such a good job. I think he's continued to get better during his time as a Duck, and when he's coming back for what'll be, I believe, his final season of eligibility, this is somebody who I can just rely on. And that's something that you always want as coaches. You want to have talented guys waiting in the wings who could step in if, God forbid, he were to get hurt, or if he were to decide to transfer or go to the NFL draft or what have you. You want to have guys available. But when you can get reliable, sound, known commodities, that's something you seek out. And that's what Marcus Harper brings at left guard. He's a guy who rarely gets beaten pass protection. He's a veteran, so knows what he's doing up there. He played next to Josh Connerly this entire season. He played next to Poncho, or at least on the same unit as Poncho for a good course of the season. So the chemistry up front, the communication, I think it's going to be pretty seamless next year. And you lose a guy like Jackson Powers Johnson, that's definitely a loss. Stephen Jones, yep, those are two real good offensive linemen, all conference and all American caliber guys. But you bring back Marcus Harper, you don't just bring back a known commodity, you bring back a guy who's just, I think, a glue guy up there. I think he's somebody who has done such a good job, and you know what you're getting from him. I know what I'm getting from him, and those guys in that room know what they're getting from him. So I'm on board with that. It's more good news. Oregon's just reloading next year. Everywhere you look, transfer portal, high school guys poised to pop, guys who are returning. Oregon's in a really, really good place right now, and I am here for it. I'm also here for your questions, including an area in which Oregon does need to be a little bit better in 2024. I'm also here to talk about LinkedIn, though, because at the start of the new year, every small business owner is asking themselves the same question, the same one. What's the one move that I can make that'll take my business to the next level in 2024? LinkedIn Jobs knows that your success all depends on the team you surround yourself with. That's why LinkedIn Jobs has created the tools to help find the right professionals for your team faster and for free. LinkedIn isn't just another job board. LinkedIn has a vast network of more than 1 billion professionals, which makes it the best place to hire. Hiring's easy when you have that many quality candidates. So easy, in fact, that 86% of small businesses get a qualified candidate within 24 hours. That's what we call efficiency. So go over there where the process is intuitive, quick, and easy with LinkedIn. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/lockedoncollege. That's linkedin.com/lockedoncollege to post your job for free. Terms and conditions do apply. So going into next season, Oregon has a roster that I feel can contend in the Big Ten. There are going to be a lot of newcomers there. And before I get to a question about something Oregon couldn't do this year and how they'll be able to progress in that area next year, I've got a mailbag question, which is always open to everybody. YouTube comments or Twitter at @McLaughlinCFB, got a new handle over there, or at Locked On Ducks. DMs and mentions are wide open all the time. If you want priority access, go join the flock over at the Locked On Ducks SUBTEXT community. Link in the description below wherever you listen to or watch this show. Absolutely, positively not a requirement. This question came in from Alex, and this is going to tie into transfers here in just a moment. Mr. McLaughlin, that's very formal. What are the rules on practice time for players? I would assume there are limitations on how many hours a student athlete can be required to attend practices. Do the limitations change throughout the offseason, preseason, and regular season? Can coaches work with student athletes outside of those regular hours if the student wants? Thanks, Alex. So, according to the NCAA, for spring football, you're allowed 15 spring practices. You can't put pads on until the third one, and you can have kids there practicing for 20 hours a week in a 34-day period. Why am I bringing this up? Oregon is bringing in a transfer quarterback, one transfer wide receiver of note, Evan Stewart, who is not the only receiver that Dillon Gabriel's unfamiliar with because he's not familiar with any of them. That's what you're allowed to do in an organized, structured environment. There are also rules about how often a coach can work with a player, and the NCAA gets weird about that sort of stuff. What there's no limit on are two guys getting together and working out and developing their timing and developing chemistry and getting together, just getting to know each other a little bit. And I think that for this Oregon team, it's going to be really important because going into last season, you had Bo Nix with Troy Franklin coming back, who he'd thrown to the year before. You had Bo Nix with Terrence Ferguson, who he'd thrown to the year before. You had Bo Nix with Tez Johnson, who he'd played with back in high school. Those are guys that he was comfortable and familiar with. And Dillon Gabriel is going to be doing something similar, I think, with the Ducks. He's going to have the structured practice time just like everybody else, but I wouldn't be surprised if those guys are getting together. And in fact, you want to hear that sort of stuff. You want them to get together and work on the way in which they, develop timing, what they do on certain routes and, scramble drill and everything like that. I think that's going to matter a good deal for the Ducks. And I hope that those guys put in that sort of work because I think chemistry and timing and rhythm and feel and comfortability and familiarity, all that sort of stuff between a quarterback and his favorite receiving targets, you can't put that together overnight. But that's what spring football is for. Can't wait for it to get started because then reports will start coming out that we'll get to react to here on the show. Love that sort of stuff. All right, back into the mailbag here. This is from Chain-Wallet. Would love to hear your thoughts on why Oregon couldn't do to Washington what Michigan was able to. Was it the game plan or personnel? Part of it was definitely the game plan. Part of it was also the personnel. Now, I think Oregon had a great defensive line this year. I really do. Washington's offensive line was also very good. Michigan's defensive line was clearly better than Oregon's. Doesn't mean the Ducks wasn't very good, but it was not as good as Michigan's because they were not able to wreak as much havoc as the Wolverines were able to in that championship game. So for Oregon going into next year, progress looks like at least staying steady where they're at, but by definition, progress would mean they get a little bit better. I think that for Oregon, their game plan and the way they generated pressure on the quarterback this year, Evan Williams was second on the team in sacks. Think about that. That's a safety. He was second on the team in sacks. Brandon Dorlus was first. But Evan Williams was a big way, and Jeffrey Bossa and the linebackers generating pressure. That was a big way that Oregon was able to pressure quarterbacks this year, and they did a very good job of doing so, by the way. They averaged a couple sacks a game, and I believe if you were to go deep on a deep dive into the analytics, their pressure rate on quarterbacks was also good. But a lot of the reason I saw they were doing that was with players like Tysheem Johnson, like Jeffrey Bossa, like corner blitzes with Kyrie Jackson and Evan Williams. And Washington made a very good counter to that, which was to go max protection. And when you go max protection, you are having guys block DBs or linebackers who are sometimes accustomed to perhaps blocking defensive linemen. Or, if a running back is used to picking up a linebacker, well, picking up a safety or a corner, he's typically not going to bring as much oomph because they're a little bit smaller. So I think that's what kind of happened in that game. I asked Jeffrey Bossa about that in the post-game press conference. Why wasn't that working? He said, well, they were just protecting really well, and we were trying to blitz and get there, and they just weren't winning enough. And so I think that Oregon, going into next year, you'd like to see your top sack guys all be defensive linemen who are able to create the maximum amount of havoc possible. I thought the defensive line was really good this year. I thought they played very well. I thought they got pressure on the quarterback well. They didn't have a particularly good day, but I think the game plan was a part of it. I also think the personnel was part of it. Jordan Birch is a disruptive player. He's more disruptive against the run than he is against the pass. He only had 3 sacks this year, but he had 7.5 tackles for loss. He was a much more impactful guy. He's a little bit like Jadeveon Clowney. When Clowney came out into the NFL, he was the number 1 overall pick. He was just this freak athlete. He still is, frankly, and he's on the Baltimore Ravens doing very well. But he never really popped as a pass rusher the way everyone expected him to. But in the run game, he was really good. And that's just kind of how Birch has been. It doesn't mean you don't want to have those sorts of guys. But I think going into next season, for Oregon, looking at a team like Washington that has a great offensive line, they don't have an offensive line at the moment because everyone's in the transfer portal up there in Seattle, and everything is just in chaos. And I'll get to that in just a moment. You're going to go up against teams that have a really good O-line, and you need players like Mateo Uyunglele or Tatum Tuioti or Blake Purchase or Jordan Birch as well, or Jamari Caldwell on the interior maybe to get some pressure every now and then. Like, you need those sorts of guys who can just win 1v1s at a high clip the way that Brandon Dorlus was consistently able to. And so when you take Dorlus out of the equation, that's a big piece to replace. But I think that what Michigan was able to do was get pressure with 4. So they could have receivers bracketed while also pressuring Penix and take him away from the looks that he wanted to get to. So I think that's kind of what transpired in that game. And their defense coordinator, Jesse Minter, really good. Really, really, really good. So, Connor Stallions or not, that Michigan defense was really, really good. So was Oregon's. Michigan's was just a little bit better. And I think that having more guys up front that can pressure the quarterback is where Oregon needs to go. I think that's kind of the next step personnel-wise. And, scheme-wise, I think it was just a really good game plan from Ryan Grubb, the then Huskies, soon-to-be Alabama offensive coordinator, and he's really, really sharp. Speaking of that particular team that got in Oregon's way, question came in about the Dogs. This from Censorship 874. Question: what do you think of this nightmare scenario for UW fans? This question was sent in prior to the coaching carousel taking off. Harbaugh bails for the NFL. The Chargers probably. Fingers crossed, he interviewed. DeBoer is a Midwest guy. He takes the now open job. UW absolutely falls off the cliff. Well, of course, Saban retires and DeBoer takes the Alabama job. And Washington right now, as they've hired Jed Fish, is in complete disarray. And I know Oregon fans get really excited at the prospect of Washington not being good next year. That's an understandable feeling because right now, if I told you Washington has to play a football game tomorrow, it is unclear who would be lining up at quarterback. It might be a walk-on. Who'd he be throwing the ball to? Jeremiah Hunter, from the wide receiver from Cal, who's a good football player, just to be clear. And yeah. they don't have a lot of guys left up there. The roster has been completely torn down, but there's something that we all have to be watching as Oregon fans on that front as we set expectations for, hey, what's everyone else in the Big Ten, including Washington, going to be next year? Your expectations when you go over to FanDuel should be that you can do what you need to do. And that is spice up the NFL postseason. Or maybe get ready for college football next year if you want. There are futures games right now. There are future bets available on college football games for 2024. Season can't get here fast enough. It's the middle of January. It's going to be a long 7.5 months. But we'll get through it together. The NFL season, the regular season is wrapped up. The playoffs are here. You can still get in on the action with FanDuel, America's #1 sports book. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets guaranteed when you place a $5 bet. That's $150 in bonus bets, whether you win or lose. You can do live same-game parlays, find bets in the new Explore tab, make a parlay in the Parlay Hub, which is the best place to find popular parlays. Go visit FanDuel.com/lockedon, make your first bet a layup, because you can do all that and more. FanDuel, official partner of the NFL. Today's episode also brought to you by Jace Medical. I know we come to sports to escape from some of the crazy realities of life, but can we talk for a minute about preparing for real life? Because it's a thing that still happens. According to the FDA, pharmacies are running out of antibiotics like amoxicillin right in the middle of the worst flu season in over a decade. Not what you'd like to hear. Jace Medical can help with that. Because if you got a supply chain issue, Jace Medical can get you a Jace case, which is a pack of 5 different antibiotics to treat a long list of bacterial infections, including UTIs, respiratory infections, sinusitis, skin infections, among others. This stuff could happen to any of us, and you want to be prepared. Visit jacemedical.com and complete your physician encounter. It will be reviewed by a board-certified physician, and your medications will be dispensed by a licensed pharmacy at a fraction of the regular cost. It's never been more important to be prepared than today. Go to jacemedical.com, use offer code LOCKEDON to get $20 off your order. All right, so now that Jedd Fisch has been announced as the head coach up at Washington, he's got a complete and total roster rebuild that he has to undertake because Washington's got nobody left. They lost their center, Parker Brailsford. He could return, not sure about that, but he's in the transfer portal. They've lost their 2 starting tackles, another interior offensive lineman to eligibility, Penix, the 3 receivers, their 2 tight ends, their #1 running back, their best linebacker, their best safety, their top corner, Jabbar Muhammad, their 2 edge rushers, and there are a couple other positions. Like this is going to be a completely different roster next year. I have a pretty high confidence level that Jedd Fisch will take that over and be able to win. I don't know how quickly that will be because it'll depend on who he gets to come with him from the Arizona team. That Arizona team was quite good. They were are set to return 18 of 22 starters. Now, their running back, Jonah Coleman, is in the transfer portal. I would suspect he's going to Washington. Maybe he does, maybe he doesn't. But I'd be surprised if he does not end up there. But if Jedd Fisch brings 10 of those 18, potential returning starters to Arizona next year with him to Seattle, he's bringing most of the staff up there. Washington could be more competitive than it feels like they would be right now. If he doesn't do that, they could have a tough year one. They could absolutely have a tough year one and not be the team that we saw for the last couple seasons or even anything close to it. They could be a lot closer to resembling 2019 or 2021 Washington than 2022 or 2023. Now, that's good news for Oregon because, as we've seen, when Washington is at their peak with the right coach and the right players, they can be very, very good. And so, as Oregon looks to make the playoff next year, and you're eyeballing that Husky game to, snap the 3-game losing skid in rivalry week, what happens up in Seattle over the next really week to 10 days? Now, when your coach leaves, the transfer portal window opens for you for 30 days, so could be more than that. But over the next couple weeks, we'll have an idea of what Washington's talent level will be in 2024. But right now, it's about as low as you can get. There's nobody left. I mean, Jeremy Bernard's in the portal. I think Jeremiah Hunter's still there, but they do not have anyone that would start on Oregon's team right now that I'm aware of that is currently on the roster. They had guys last year. They're not going to have them next year. So I think that for Washington, Jedd Fisch will win. If he can build Arizona into a 10-win team, yeah, he can do that at Washington as well. It took him 3 years at Arizona. Might take him 2 at Washington in the transfer portal era. We'll have to wait and see. But that's kind of what the latest has been over there. And I think that affects Oregon a great deal because, look, personally, I lament the 12-team playoff because I think it takes away from what makes college football special, which is the week-to-week urgency. There are positives for it. Specifically, the number one positive for me as a college football fan is that Oregon will have a better chance to get into the playoff every year. That's objectively true. I'm not down on that element of it. Overall, though, I love the sport. I love the sport. I love the Ducks. I love the sport. And the sport is unique, and the 12-team playoff takes that away. But with Washington, if they're not a team that's going to be competitive in the Big Ten next year, that is good news for the Ducks. Because even though there is a lot more leeway granted to teams trying to make a 12-team playoff compared to a 4-team playoff, there is still far more week-to-week urgency than what you have in the NFL. You're not going to have 6 and 7 and 8 lost teams making the playoffs, for instance. You're going to have 2 and 3 lost teams in a shorter regular season making the playoffs. So if you can look at that Washington game and feel confident about what Oregon can do, well, suddenly, if Oregon is, at least on paper, going to win that game, that's a big boost for the Ducks because playing in the Big Ten, there's not going to be a strength of schedule concern. Even with the Civil War being there and the Boise State game getting, everything getting shuffled around and whatnot, Oregon's schedule is sufficiently tough. You're in the Big Ten. It's one of the big 2 conferences in America going into 2024. And I think Washington will be one of the good programs in there. They just might not be a good team in 2024. But the Ducks have got Ohio State at home, Michigan on the road, Wisconsin on the road. We'll see what Jonathan Smith does in year 1 at Michigan State. I suspect that'll take a couple years to really get things going as well. But I think that for Washington, yes, the energy for Duck fans is definitely there of, oh my gosh, Washington's falling off a cliff. With Jedd Fisch, I do not suspect they'll stay there for long. They could maybe be there for 1 year. I'd be surprised if they aren't an 8 to 10 win team by 2025. But in 2024, we got to wait and see. Good question, though. You were mildly prophetic there with, DeBoer leaving Washington and everything and falling off a cliff. Well, the roster has all but bottomed out right now. We'll see how much they're able to rebuild. Last question here. This one from Rick. Mailbag. I'm seeing a lot on Twitter, and we all know everything you read on Twitter is real. It's a good point. And other sources that, quote, Dan Lanning turned down Alabama. Do we know if this was even offered to him, or was Lanning to Bama all speculation? It was not all speculation. I know that for a fact. I do not report many things on here because mostly I am in the opinion business. Every now and then I hear a chirp along the grapevine. I know that Alabama's interest in Dan Lanning was very real. I cannot confirm to you because I have not seen anything, nor has anyone directly indicated, because Alabama would never want to get that out if it did, that Dan Lanning was presented a contract offer to be the next Alabama football coach. What I do know is that the interest was very real, and we don't know how far it got. I don't know if I can't say because I didn't see these things happen, or I haven't asked Dan Lanning and haven't spoken to me about these matters. I don't know if he took an interview. I don't know if an offer ever was formally made. I know that the interest was absolutely real, and Dan Lanning wants to stay at Oregon instead. And that's great news for the Ducks. But I think that is such a testament to the program that he's built and is going to continue to build, and the culture that exists up in Eugene around this football program and everything that has gone into making Oregon football what it is, that Dan Lanning decided, I got everything I need here. I don't need to go take the head coaching job at Alabama. If he had wanted it, he could have taken it. That does not mean a formal offer was ever presented. But at this point, here's the important thing. He's Oregon's coach, and nothing else matters. Appreciate everyone listening. I will see you next time. Have a wonderful rest of your day. And as always, everybody, go Ducks.